Dan, good morning to you. So, the man on the stand is the very same man who filmed the CEO of Bosasa, Gavin Watson, counting those large sums of money inside the vault. But he says he's still a man who's very much afraid of Gavin Watson, even though he's now left the company.
We'll unpack that in a short while, Colin Gambi. Indeed, fearful of Gavin Watson because he claims Gavin Watson is connected right to the highest levels of government. Now, Mr. Van Tonder, in about an hour or so, will resume his testimony just over there in the hot seat where Angelo Agrizzi spent 9 days testifying here about the allegations of bribery and corruption involving Bosasa and senior state officials. And of course, the Deputy Chief Justice himself, Raymond Zondo, will take his position, the center stage, over there in about an hour or so, to resume the hearings here. Of course, part of yesterday, Angelo Agrizzi finished his testimony and then Andries van Tonder resumed it. We'll hear what he's going to say in the corroboration stand. I'm joined now by Erin Bates, our colleague, who's been covering the state capture inquiry for a long time, since it started last year. Morning, Erin.
Morning, Dan.
Angelo Agrizzi wrapping up yesterday. One of the biggest things that came out yesterday was the racism thing.
Yes.
And he said, yes, he's a racist, after they played a clip where he refers to black people with a K word, and he says you can judge me on that. And people are now wondering what has got that to do now with the evidence that he's presented in 9 days when he was on the hot seat.
Well, it does seem that Advocate Paul Pretorius is preempting that being used as a critique of Agrizzi's testimony, and that he's really out with a racist vendetta, and that's informed his decision to come before the stand at this point. And as you say, he's conceded, he's confessed, he says, yes, I am a racist, but don't let that throw the baby out effectively with the bathwater. And for me, Dan, what was interesting was in that moment to see the Deputy Chief Justice firstly not give him a free pass and sort of dismiss this inflammatory racist language that he used, but also not let it cloud his assessment of the evidence before him. And the kind of dignity and poise that I think the Deputy Chief Justice showed in that moment in the wake of hearing that kind of language. But Dan, what's also important is that that is an extract of a 3-hour clip that includes some very important information involving conversation between Agrizzi, and the Watsons. It is between Agrizzi
and what has stood out for you in that long conversation? I mean, here at the Commission, they didn't play everything, but it has been submitted as evidence.
Correctly, and we remember, of course, that we're going to hear more from the Chief Financial Officer today. What for me was interesting was that what seems to be Gavin Watson's son and Agrizzi have a discussion about a Hawks investigation. Agrizzi seems quite anxious that the Hawks investigation may be rekindled and revived, but he says to Agrizzi, well, that will be a process. And then he asks about the banks. And now we know in separate evidence at this inquiry over the Gupta business accounts, the banks acted very decisively after President Jacob Zuma, as he was then, appointed Des van Rooyen and then had to do a U-turn and reappoint Nhlanhla Nene. And so what's interesting is that Gavin Watson's son, in this conversation with Agrizzi, during which they both use loaded and hateful language towards people of colour, they also talk about action potentially from the banks. And it raises a pertinent question both then and now about why the banks haven't acted against Bosasa-linked companies.
Now, it's going to be very interesting as well, because when you're a chief financial officer of an organization, a company, one of the things you manage is a relationship with your bankers. It's going to be very interesting if during his testimony here, when he resumed today and over the next day or two, if he's continuing, whether or not Andries van Tonder will be questioned about that particular matter you've picked up from that long recording that's been submitted as evidence. The other thing I've been wondering about, who was auditing Bosasa?
I've been wondering the same thing.
And will the chief financial officer be asked those questions and say, who were your auditors? What did each and every audit find? It's going to be very, very interesting to see that. The other thing that came out for me that stood out yesterday from Mr. Van Tonder's testimony late yesterday afternoon is what Colin Gambi just used now in his intro to say he said he was fearful of Mr. Gavin Watson, and that even today he's still fearful because he says he's connected to the highest level in government.
And we know from the evidence Agrizzi has already tabled that Watson himself spoke about his meetings with former President Jacob Zuma, going to Nkandla, actually saying he thought Nkandla was a bit of a wreck and it wasn't worth all the money government had spent on it, but that at the time Watson was close to the highest level of government to the very power seat of government at the time. And so it's quite plausible that those sorts of relationships have continued. And Agritzi himself has spoken about his own fears, the death threats, the messages, sort of veiled threats from other colleagues who are directors at Bosasa and the like. So that is certainly something to look out for.
The other important part as well is the corroboration of evidence. Yes. I guess when he's on the stand here from today, Mr. Van Tonder, as he continues, he'll be asked to corroborate a lot of things that came out from Agritzi. Yesterday was that clip which he said, yes, I did record it.
Yes, and also I think, you know, for the likes of people who are critical of Agritzi, Van Tonder kind of falls into the same batch or the same category. These are part of the group of whistleblowers who've now sort of defected from Bosasa, met many times at Agritzi's house, liaised with one another about whistleblowing on the corruption in the company, and are now coming forward before the inquiry. And we heard from Agritzi that there could be tens of witnesses, you know, almost up to 100 people, so 50 people who could be available to come and testify on the corruption at Bosasa.
And of course we have not heard the last from him, because the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo was very clear yesterday that he might be coming back here to be cross-examined, as we know. Thank you very much, Aaron. Well, Polly, there you have it. We have to wait and see what much more corroboration or any new evidence or any more damning allegation that might come out of the mouth of Mr. Andries van Tonder, the former Chief Financial Officer of Bosasa, in relation to his evidence here today when they resume from about 10 o'clock here this morning.
Live for us at the Parktown venue of the State Capture Inquiry, ENCA's senior anchor Dan Moyane, alongside Aaron Bates.